Australia should scare you. Australia's quite collapsed by how money works. This came up in recommended. I'm just like, okay. This seems like it could be okay to have a look at on stream. And see what happens here. Obvious troll bait. Yeah, I mean, obviously that's bait, the title. But I have no idea what they're gonna say. So I'm gonna just see what they're trying to say. Because I never watch stuff like this anyway. Honestly. And I'll see if I think it's got any merit to it.
Staying on top of all the developments in finance, business, and economics can be exhausting.
So just don't do it.
Everything becoming an excuse to gamble, corporate consolidation of markets, and political influence driving huge asset bubbles, causing extreme wealth inequality, spiraling consumer debt, and diminishing savings, stagnating wages, unaffordable real estate, and generational wealth divides, all string tied together by questionable government programs, is enough to get pretty depressing. But just remember, it could be worse. We could be Canada. And if that wasn't bad enough, somehow there is a country that is pushing these issues even further, and as a warning for how bad things could get, has managed to hold on for now. Let's call it Canada with snakes.
Around 200,000
Okay, but
has managed to.
What's this title? Can Australia handle it? Never got it. This is probably topics I don't know enough about. Like, I have no idea what, like, reinvesting mineral wealth. What?
Hold on for now.
I'm probably,
Let's call it,
because this is stuff I don't ever watch, I don't ever look up stuff about it. This is probably stuff that I have no idea about as much. That's probably what the algo wants me to do. But I feel like anywhere can't handle an economic downturn very well at the moment. It's not just Australia. Some places are a lot worse off anyway.
Canada with snakes.
Around 200,000 electronic poker machines, known as pokies, fill bars, pubs, clubs and casinos.
Capping losses at $100 a day and $5,000 a year.
Australia is officially the worst on record, with the average property costing 8 times the median household income.
Sydney's rental market has gone from bad to...
So you can save up for 8 years? Oh no, it might be more than that. Well, that depends where you're trying to live too. There's cheap real estate out in the country areas, but if you're trying to live in the cities, obviously it's going to be more expensive.
Worse, with prices continuing to soar.
With revelations, taxpayer money is being used on drugs.
And the gambling and the drugs are people's own faults. They're nothing to do with the actual costs of the real estate and living. It's people's own decisions to do that. And yes, they may get caught by the algorithms and stuff, but I mean, just don't do it.
Every year, up until its downfall, Credit Suisse would prepare a report that looked at how wealthy the people of the countries around the world were. Instead of just looking at GDP per capita, which calculates how much the average person in an economy produces in market output every year, this report attempted to calculate the net worth of those people to see how good they were at accumulating wealth over time. Someone with a high income that is spending everything they make on rent and overpriced food isn't going to grow their wealth as quickly as someone who has a more modest income but is paying off their own home and is investing diligently into retirement accounts. I like to call this the San Fran tech bro conjecture. But according to these annual reports, the Australian people always looked like the second group of slower, more deliberate wealth builders. Their raw income isn't as high as here in America, but they were consistently some of the wealthiest people on the planet. UBS, which acquired Credit Suisse following its collapse, recently released the 2024 report, and once again, Australians had the second highest median net worth on the planet. They only fell behind Luxembourg, which is a European micronation which you are probably not in the tax bracket to even be aware of. The fact that this report tracks the median instead of the average net worth is also really important. This means that the Australian right in the middle of a lineup from the richest to the poorest is more than twice as rich as an American in the same position.
I assume that's accounting for the conversion rate of the currency.
The report also includes a generic average where America does have a slight edge. But all that really tells us is that we have an inequality problem with a small group right at the top massively dragging up the average at the expense of everybody else in line. Considering all of this, the title of this video
Where's the evidence to say about that it's the rich are richer and dragging up the median? Where's the evidence of that?
might not make much sense to you. Anybody would be lucky to be Australian, right? Well,
Yes! Come here, be Australian. It's a good time.
yes and no. And lucky really is the important word here. Australia has become so wealthy by getting lucky in just a few key industries, and then by going all in on keeping those industries alive by any means necessary, including its own long-term viability. Of course, the most obvious place where this has happened is in the country's outrageous real estate market, which makes even the most overpriced cities in America look downright affordable by comparison. And of course, we will get to that.
Okay.
But housing
There's stuff
is
I'm like
actually
I
only
shouldn't
just
say
one
stuff
symptom
because I don't
of
know,
much
but
bigger
also it's like, well, some of the industry stuff I haven't really researched. I don't really know as much about that other than what you hear secondhand from people talking.
structural problems that the country has been quietly trying to ignore. There are lots of people that look like they are happily building wealth in Australia, and there are even a lot of people becoming extremely wealthy. But the different ways to actually obtain that wealth are very narrow. The key to Australian wealth is dirt. Either digging it out of the ground to export as unimproved natural resources, or by selling it back and forth to one another. Economic complexity ranks a country's exports based on how varied they are, and how unique they are to that country. A country that exports a wide variety of highly unique products that only it produces.
I haven't done accounting for church, but I know how to do accounting. I know how to budget and all that. I do my own accounts for my personal sole trader business stuff and all that. You just got to be smart about it, basically. And you can, yeah, Japan, and don't spend the stuff you don't have to, and you can buy things at a lower budget, especially if you know how to cook. You can cook things yourself instead of eating out all the time and all that, and that saves a lot of money.
Would have high economic complexity. A country that only exports a few goods that lots of other countries also export.
See, he started off talking seemingly about personal wealth, and now he's talking about Australia as a whole, as a mineral industries and stuff.
Would have low economic complexity. Australia has the lowest economic complexity of any high-income country in the world, ranking 102nd out of 146 total countries included in the survey. That has been falling consistently since the 1950s, when it was in the top 30 thanks to a combination of manufacturing as well as research and development coming out of the country. But today, this puts it behind places like Uganda, which have a more varied export base than Australia. It now depends almost exclusively on selling natural resources and livestock to growing economies in Asia because it just doesn't make financial sense to focus anywhere else. Having
Exports to Japan, there we go.
such a resource-dependent economy means investors have to decide between funding new innovations that could improve the world, or at the very least provide sustainable cash flows, or they could invest into developing more mines to export more resources to an existing list of willing buyers. The second option has just been a much safer bet for decades, which means that the country has some.
I mean, so the human seems to be talking
of the most advanced.
very much trying to be distant and objective, I guess. And do they say where they're from? This channel. No. Oh, United States. So they're looking at it from an outside perspective as well.
It's natural resource extraction in the world, but is severely behind in other areas of innovation like technology and advanced manufacturing. In some tragic irony, the Australian government itself has helped to fund a lot of scientific research resulting in advancements in solar panels, the advent of Wi-Fi, modern medical tools, and even Google Maps. Any of these alone would be a major contributor to the.
And when there was a cork shortage, Australia invented the screw top caps for wine bottles.
The country's
That sort
relatively
of thing.
small population. But when it came to actually commercializing these technologies, the country lost out because its dependence on natural resources undermined its business environment. Investors would rather the
remember.
safe, predictable option, and so these technologies naturally moved to where they could find funding from other sources that were willing to take a risk. Unfortunately for Australia, this actually just ended up making their investment markets even more risky. For a long time, the Australian dollar was almost perfectly correlated with natural resource prices, which meant Australian investors...
That's the thing is, like, I haven't done research on this topic to know if any of these graphs or anything are accurate. But I just always take it with a grain of salt.
were resource investors whether they liked it or not. This price connection has decoupled since COVID, but that itself is probably not a good sign. It could actually be the biggest indication that Australia has dug itself into a hole, both literally and figuratively, that it's going to be almost impossible to get out of without giving up a lot of the wealth it's become accustomed to. So it's time to learn how money works to find out how long Australia can keep getting away with it. This week's video is sponsored by Henson Shaving. Henson is on a mission to revolutionize shaving, creating a skin-friendly experience that eliminates irritation, razor burn, and ingrown
How long
hairs.
is it damn ad? Wait, 6.5 minutes, and then that's a whole minute ad. I'm skipping it.
Get 100 free blades with your purchase of a Henson razor. That's enough.
If they're supposedly saying that their blades are so good and stay sharp, then why do you need 100 free blades?
Refills for 2 years of shaving. There are dozens of serious problems just under the surface in Australia that you might not think of much by themselves. But together, they changed the optics of the country from a thriving and vibrant economy to a place living on long borrowed time.
So theoretically, a person living in Australia should notice these in the everyday, right?
One of those issues is gambling. Sports gambling, online casinos, and market wagering has become one of the fastest growing industries here in America since regulations were loosened in 2018.
So if gambling in Australia is a problem, then the people that are selling the gambling machines and that aren't going to stop because they get money, it's the people that have to stop gambling. And then the individual person will be richer because they're not gambling.
Since then, billions of dollars have been piled into carving out market share, encouraging...
Oh god, all of the triggered words on one page.
people to bet on basically anything. The rush to acquire customers has become so extreme that a lot of these companies aren't even running their online casinos at a profit because they are reinvesting as much as they can into growing their customer base as fast as possible. The reason why investors don't mind burning billions of dollars in a highly risky industry with serious regulatory risks is because of Australia. Australia is living in the future when it comes to gambling, and that future is bleak. According to their own government inquiries, Australians lose almost $1,000 per person every year through different forms of betting. That's inclusive of a large share of the population who don't partake at all, so the losses of the average Aussie punter are statistically far worse.
Yeah, the people that do it get caught and spend more. And then they probably don't realize how much they're spending and how much of a difference it would make to their life.
Australia has a deep, wide, and highly entrenched gaming industry. The
Sad
average
Aussie
Australian
JPEG,
pub
yeah.
operates like a mini casino complete with a small selection of electronic poker machines.
It's not just electronic poker machines and things though. There's a lot of betting on horse races and the footy, AFL, NRL, that sort of thing. It's not just the pokies. And Australians, generally speaking, I'm an outlier, are fairly big on sports. There's a big culture here.
Betting on sports is commonplace. Horse racing is a major tradition that even has its own public holiday. Novelty betting markets has been a major thing there for decades, and this is all on top of more traditional gambling like lotteries, casinos, and scratch-offs. Back here in America, the venture capitalists have done the math, and have figured out if they can replicate Australian-style gambling in a market as big as ours, then they can stand to make trillions. Australia is also a great business test case against the risk of regulation. Unsurprisingly, the sheer market penetration of gambling in Australia has caused problems for at-risk individuals, largely young men. On top of the financial consequences of losing thousands of dollars every year, the country has an epidemic of related issues like fraud.
Because you go with the boys to the footy, and you have a few beers, and you bet on the races, or bet on who will win.
Petty crime and violence stemming from unhealthy gambling. The public also largely hates how prevalent gambling is pushed on them. So you would expect it would be easy to get the political support to pass laws to moderate the reach of this industry.
Yeah. So interesting example of this is on TV. You see ads for like sports bet and things, betting apps. Is there ones on YouTube here? Yeah, something like that. Yeah, sportsbet.com.au. Look, oh yeah, he's using part of the ad as a visual.
The future is artificial intelligence.
This comes up on YouTube and stuff too,
Sportsbet's
but
new
when there's
feed
ads.
is powered by actual intelligence, like Wayne here. He's a real person who shares his bets using a state-of-the-art single-core multi-processor. That's a human brain. And Brad.
How you going?
This smart unit is hardware and software compatible, completely wireless, and occasionally online.
Their ads are ridiculous sometimes.
She features advanced voice recognition. Great instinct, Sarah. Greg's so actually intelligent, he's basically from the future.
Do that.
Actually, I'm from Werribee.
Close enough. All these punters run on megabytes, complete with an inbuilt cooling system. Too hot for you, Tin Man. So when they share their bets on the feed, you
The
can put your
robot
real
can't
bets
eat a
from
pie.
real people. Sportsbet's new feed, powered by actual intelligence.
What's gambling really costing you? For
This is a funny thing. After all the gambling ads, they have to put a disclaimer.
free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.
They have to put that on the end of every single betting ad. I know. I don't get it. But people go like, their parents have done it. They get into a group of people that do it, and then they go along because they don't want to feel like an outsider. I think that's one of the biggest problems as well. It ties into the loneliness epidemic and that sort of thing.
Right? Wrong. All of these companies employ lots of people, and they spend a huge amount of money on fear-mongering the job losses that would come if a local bar couldn't have a casino floor stapled onto it. For any of you who haven't been to Australia, you might think I am joking. I am not joking. Australia has been extremely soft on regulation, and while gambling by itself is not single-handedly going to take down the country, it's emblematic of a lot of genuine issues that aren't getting addressed because nobody wants to be responsible for shaking up the delicate balance of prosperity. The same is true for the mining industry from earlier, and the real estate crisis that we still need to get to. There is nothing wrong with the country exporting its resources. The problem Australia has had is turning a revenue source that is good for Australia into money that is good for Australians. A lot of the revenue generated by mining in Australia has just been paid out to foreign mining companies in arrangements that are not that different from many exploited third world petrostates. Australia has tried in the past to generate more government revenue from its resources, but heavy lobbying won out, and people have been too afraid to try it again since the currency has been so dependent on these exports. In fact, the government has actually gone the other way and given hundreds of obscure grants, bonuses, deferments, schemes, and incentives to mining companies to help them along. According to the government's own minerals website, the intention of these schemes is for providing both commercial and operational advantages to investors. New government initiatives support the long-term sustainability of the Australian resources sector by de-risking and encouraging mineral exploration and discovery.
Inevitably, the minerals will run out, though. However much you mine at a time, you'll run out eventually.
The country's biggest problems is...
Oh yeah, I need to play that game. I've got Santa Claus. It's a horror game. It's one for around Christmas though, and I wasn't streaming around Christmas. But maybe that'll change another time. But I've got that here. See? It looks like a fun game. For a little something more lighthearted. Look at his goofy run.
You're on the list.
It looks silly.
that nobody wanted to invest anywhere else. So this does seem a bit strange. But destabilizing this source of foreign income could knock over other highly leveraged areas of the economy. So their government is trying to keep it running hot by whatever means necessary. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, how the f did this place get so rich?
Yeah, I had a look
to
when you
begin with?
linked it, when you
Was
said
it really
about
just
it.
putting a bigger number on their homes and calling that wealth? Well, yes, but there actually is still one more thing. Australia has a system called superannuation, which is a special tax-advantaged investment vehicle that Australian workers can use to save and invest for their retirement.
Yeah, super is compulsory for employers to pay for employees here. What's it called again in America? The 40K stuff. The US equivalent to superannuation plan are defined benefit and defined contribution plans. Okay, well that, whatever you call them. Yeah, 401k. Yeah, okay. 403, something like that. Yeah. Individual retirement account for the IRA. Yeah, whichever. That's what super is anyway. Basically, part of what you get paid gets paid into a long-term deposit. Yeah, that one. I thought Social Security included more other things, but yeah. We don't have Social Security here, so that's a bit different.
It's functionally similar to a 401k or an IRA, but the big difference is that employers must contribute a share of their employees' pay into their nominated account every year, instead of it being voluntary or offered.
I'm investing like 85% of my super, I think it was at the moment, because I might as well.
As a part of their job package. Their current contribution requirement is 11.5%, which means every Australian worker is effectively saving more than 10% of their income for retirement. Something like that would make even a lot of disciplined financial planners blush.
The problem is if you take stuff out of your super, then it mucks the whole thing up.
The hope is that this money will eventually take the strain off the public-funded pensions as the Australian population gets older, and it has built some enormous fortunes. According to JP Morgan, the average Australian household now has the equivalent of almost $250,000 invested in just this one asset class, before including regular savings, investments, or home equity. The fact that it is mandatory and applied to all workers means that the concentration of retirement savings in the hands of already wealthy households isn't as high as it is here in America. This is genuinely an amazing financial tool, and you might be starting to notice a trend here. It has covered over a lot of other problems. Collectively, Australian superannuation is worth more than $2 trillion USD, which is only enough to buy 2/3 of Apple, but it has outgrown the Australian investment market because investment activity is just not as strong there. This means more and more of these retirement savings have been invested abroad, with the majority of that money ending up back here in the American markets. Now, that alone is not a bad way to diversify risk outside of Australia. And yes, it's all getting pumped into the Magnificent Seven. But that's all investing these days. What could possibly go wrong? The real problem is that Australia is technically taking their cash, which is propped up by a mining industry, and then giving it to us so that we can build businesses here in America. A lot of Australian companies, which are not in the gaming, mining, or real estate industry, are actually choosing to raise investments and go public here in America instead. Simply because we have more investors that are willing to put money into companies that aren't in gambling, mining, or real estate. I mean, thanks, I guess. But if the country was more accommodating of other investments, it could use a lot of this savings to make its people and itself wealthier and more productive. The wealth invested into the Australian superannuation system may also be very impressive, but it won't actually do much unless it can keep up with how expensive it is to live in Australia. A common strategy for Australian workers is to wait until they can access their retirement savings, take all of the money they accumulated over their working career, and use it to pay off
I'll sacrifice 1,000 lock-ons before I let this company die.
off their house. So yeah, this is where we finally get to the elephant in the room. Real estate. The cost of housing in Australia has made every single problem so far even worse, and it's also going to make it much harder to fix. According to a broad market survey, the average age of a first home buyer in Australia is 36 years old, and the fastest growing group of people buying a home for the first time are those aged between 40 and 49.
Yeah, there's multiple circumstances for this though, because there's a lot of them that go into renting in places and not buying them. And then there's also people are older when they leave the home that their parents are in now compared to what they used to, generally speaking. And so they're older when they leave, and so they don't need to buy a place as soon.
Homes are so expensive that they are usually taken on with a 30-year mortgage, and families will move into larger homes as they build up equity. So a lot of Australians are now getting to the age they would like to retire still in massive debt. Using the proceeds from superannuation to pay off their mortgage doesn't technically make them any poorer. They have just transferred retirement savings into real estate equity. But it does allow them to access the government's public old age pension, since it's not counted as an asset to assess if they have the ability to fund themselves.
You didn't put this, I added it on. Did you forget that?
It's paying a mortgage
But
or
yeah,
rent.
I thought it would be interesting to have a look at anyway. And it's something like, okay, I live in Australia. That sort of thing.
It takes up so much of people's budget there. Giving up retirement savings often works out to be more financially responsible, because even a modest pension income can cover everything else as long as they have a paid-off house to live in. For many households, this has made one of Australia's greatest wealth-building tools just another way to prop up a real estate market that is already so expensive that the rest of the world should be afraid of it. But how did it get this bad in the first place? There is the usual combination of investor speculation, generous financing, NIMBYism, and high levels of migration into cities that couldn't expand fast enough. But on top of that, Australia has added its own special ingredients. Taxes on earned income in Australia are some of the highest in the world. Someone earning the equivalent of just 120,000 American dollars a year would pay
Hold on. I'm pretty sure... Oh, is it different now? Tax-free threshold. I swear that the tax-free threshold was like 33,000 a year before. Yeah, I worked out my expenses as well. Again, recently, and that would not cover it. That must have changed since I looked at it before. Let me see if I can find something on it. Oh wait, that could be US dollars? No, it's an Australian website. I don't get that. Oh, well, they must have changed it since last I knew. Because, I was pretty sure that 33,000, under 33,000 per annum was the tax-free threshold when I started working.
5% on every additional dollar they earned after that. And remember, Australia is not a cheap place to live. So even though that would be a very good salary for anybody, it's not actually going to go that far after tax is taken out. However, one of the unique features of Australia is the fact that personal investment losses, including paper real estate losses, can be used to write off personal income to reduce their tax. This effectively makes every person in Australia their own little business that can accrue expenses to offset their tax. And the best business to get into with the most possible expenses is real estate. This tax structure has encouraged high-income earners to favor investing into real estate that they can use to make paper losses like depreciation to offset their income, and then turn highly taxed earned income into much more modestly taxed capital gains. The system, called negative gearing, is almost universally agreed to be broken. It would be a lot easier to tax everybody at a lower rate and get rid of these write-offs. But it's been really hard to make that happen because they can't afford this house of cards to unravel. There is now so much debt and wealth.
The problem people have, though, I was just looking at this title, is like,
It's been really hard to...
They're withdrawing their super, which they shouldn't be doing. And they're taking out home loans that they can't repay. Which is a thing at one point, there was a royal commission to banks that they cannot give you loans that they can't calculate that you can't pay back anymore. Here.
Make that happen because they can't afford this house of cards to unravel. There is now so much debt and wealth tied up in Australian housing that the Australian economy could be wiped out by even the indication that the government could rein in these incentives. The same thing is happening with other less obvious policies as well. Immigration to Australia has been some of the most intense in the world, and the country has become highly dependent on low-income immigrants to do a lot of the jobs they aren't willing to, and high-income immigrants to also buy into their asset market. According to Henley Partners, a law firm specializing in legal arrangements for high-net-worth immigrants, over 40% of the millionaires in Australia today were not born there. Some have, of course, gone there and made their fortunes, but most have just gone there and parked their fortunes that they already had.
I think that also has to do with work ethic. The immigrants that move to Australia move and they want to work, whereas there's a bunch of people that are native Australians that don't want to work. There are people that are on government benefits with Centrelink that go, oh, I don't want to work 3 hours a week, as one of the excuses that we heard on the news one time.
In all of the biggest issues in the world today, Australia is a look at what 10 years from now could mean for us. And perhaps the biggest problem is that so far they have managed to keep everything on track. But there is a difference between success and delayed consequences. Australia has some of the most valuable banking institutions in the world, but most of their books are tied up in lending to an overvalued real estate market. Workers are getting taxed heavily while dealing with declining real incomes. Businesses are finding it too expensive to operate there, and all of the wealth in the world, paper or otherwise, doesn't mean anything if it can only buy you a one-bedroom apartment 2 hours from anywhere.
2 hours from anywhere? You don't get apartments 2 hours from anywhere if you're in a country town in Australia. They're all houses because they're small towns in the middle of whoop whoop. So if you've got apartments, you're in a city area.
Now, if you are an Australian and this was all a bit depressing for you, it could be worse. You could be from the UK. Also, go and watch this video on Canada next to find out how they effectively made exactly the same mistakes as Australia without even accidentally making themselves rich in the process.
Some of the stuff is like... He seems to be trying to attribute all of the reasons to these financial things going on rather than it also being attributed to the behavior of the people. I think that's the main thing I noticed throughout this is like, look at all the graphs and the money and whatever, but then also like gambling. Okay, people will be richer if they didn't gamble. Duh. As people's behavioural choices that they make, even if they feel like they don't have a choice, they're still making a choice that it ends up causing them problems. Like saying about people withdrawing their super. They should not be doing that. But I get what he sees by looking at the information. He also never addressed his question of how long will Australia last if it goes how it currently is. He never ended up asking his question properly. Answering his question properly. He explained all this and then didn't sum up all his points into an answer to the question he posed at the start. But yes, there's raised cost of living and inflation's an issue. Inflation's always an issue with this sort of thing, though. Because, like, cost of living goes up, and then the amount people are paid has to go up. And then it's a vicious cycle because it keeps getting worse until there is something like the Depression. How America got so good at buying shit? Wow. Nobody wants to work anymore. He's written the title like that SpongeBob meme. That is the problem though. Western culture, and especially in schools and things, I've heard from teachers in America, thinking of the US, that kids don't want to have careers in traditional jobs from back in the day, but they want to be YouTubers and social media influencers and that more. I guess with the rise of it becoming viable career options, but also they see it as something whereas like, okay, but that also ends up not helping the overall country with everything going on. Interesting discussion point. It all eventually balance itself out. It'll get to a point where they have to address it and solve the problems, or the entire economy will collapse and everything will collapse, and it'll be like, well, do you want a country of people that can't afford anything, or do you want to just suck it up and solve the problems?